Constance, 1415. The air in the council hall was thick with anticipation and animosity. Jan Hus, a lone figure against a sea of crimson robes, stood accused of heresy. His words, once whispered in Prague's churches, now echoed in the heart of Christendom. He refuted the charges leveled against him, citing scripture and reason. He denied advocating heresy and challenged anyone to prove him wrong using the Bible. He stood firm, unyielding, his voice resonating with truth and defiance. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. Accusations, half-truths, and outright lies were hurled at him. When he attempted to defend himself, he was silenced, his voice drowned out by the clamor of his accusers. Justice was not the aim. Condemnation was the predetermined outcome. In his prison cell, Hus found solace in prayer. He knew his fate was sealed, but he remained steadfast in his faith. He sought strength not for himself, but for his followers, for Bohemia, for the truth he so fervently believed in. The sentence was swift and merciless. Hus was formally condemned as a heretic. His priestly vestments were torn from him, each act a symbolic degradation. He endured the ritual humiliation with unwavering dignity. Bound and guarded, Hus was paraded through the streets of Constance. The crowds jeered, but some watched with a mixture of pity and fear. The pyre awaited him, a stark symbol of the church's intolerance. As the flames rose, Hus sang hymns. His voice, though strained, carried a note of triumph. Even in the face of death, his spirit remained unbroken. He prayed for his enemies, asking God to forgive them, for they knew not what they did. The flames consumed him. His ashes were scattered into the Rhine, ensuring no relics would remain. But the church had miscalculated. They had extinguished a life, but they had ignited a fire that would soon engulf Bohemia. In Prague, news of Hus's execution spread like wildfire. Queen Sophia, who had initially hoped for a peaceful resolution, was devastated. She understood the gravity of the situation. Bohemia was on the brink of rebellion. Anger and resentment simmered in the streets of Prague. Jan Žižka, a seasoned warrior, felt the pulse of the people. Hus's martyrdom had lit a fire in his soul, a fire that demanded justice and retribution. Preachers emerged, denouncing the church's tyranny and calling for reform. The chalice, symbol of communion under both kinds, became the emblem of resistance, a rallying cry for those who sought a purer faith. Bohemia was no longer a land of quiet piety. It was a land preparing for war. The execution of Jan Hus had sown the seeds of revolution. The Hussite wars were about to begin. Prague, 1419. 4 years had passed since Hus's fiery end in Constance, but the embers of his teachings refused to be extinguished. The people of Bohemia, already burdened by heavy taxes and perceived corruption within the church, felt betrayed. The execution of their beloved reformer was the final spark that ignited the tinder of discontent. Among those who felt the sting of injustice was Jan Žižka, a seasoned warrior with a reputation for both bravery and cunning. Žižka had served in various conflicts, gaining invaluable experience in military strategy and tactics. The injustice of Hus's death stirred something deep within him, a sense of righteous anger and a burning desire to defend the truth. The unrest reached a boiling point when King Wenceslaus IV, swayed by Catholic advisors, refused to address the growing grievances. A procession, led by radical priests, marched towards the new town hall, demanding the release of Hussite prisoners. The defenestration of Prague, a pivotal moment that would forever alter the course of Bohemian history. Angered by the councillors' refusal to release the prisoners and fueled by religious zeal, the Hussites stormed the building, throwing the royalist officials out of the windows. This act of defiance sent shockwaves throughout the kingdom. The news of the defenestration reached King Wenceslaus, already weakened by years of heavy drinking and political turmoil. The shock proved too much for him. Within weeks, he succumbed, leaving the throne vacant and Bohemia plunged into further chaos. With the king dead, Bohemia was left without a clear leader, and the country teetered on the brink of civil war. Jan Žižka, recognizing the urgency of the situation, stepped forward to organize the scattered Hussite factions. He called for unity, discipline, and unwavering faith in the face of adversity. Žižka began transforming the disparate groups of Hussite rebels into a disciplined fighting force. He drilled them in basic military tactics, emphasizing the importance of organization and obedience. He taught them to use their farming tools as weapons and to fight together as a unified whole. The first clashes between the Hussites and the royalist forces were brutal and chaotic. The heavily armored knights, confident in their superior training and equipment, charged headlong into the Hussite lines. But Žižka had anticipated their tactics. Žižka's innovative use of wagon forts proved to be a decisive advantage. The wagons, chained together, formed a mobile fortress that could withstand the knights' charges. The Hussites, protected by the wagon walls, unleashed a hail of arrows, stones, and gunfire, decimating the enemy ranks. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Hussites emerged victorious in these early battles. Žižka's tactical brilliance and the unwavering faith of his followers had turned the tide against the seemingly invincible royalist armies. News of these victories spread like wildfire, attracting more and more people to the Hussite cause. Queen Sophia, now acting as regent, found herself in an impossible position. She was sympathetic to some of the Hussite grievances, but she also felt a duty to uphold the authority of the crown and the Catholic Church. She tried to negotiate a peaceful resolution, but the growing radicalism of the Hussites made compromise increasingly difficult. The Hussite uprising had begun. A small spark of religious dissent had ignited into a raging fire that threatened to consume the entire kingdom of Bohemia. The stage was set for a long and bloody conflict, one that would test the limits of faith, courage, and human endurance. The unity forged in the fires of rebellion began to crack. Žižka, ever the pragmatist, struggled to hold together the disparate factions within the Hussite movement. The radical Taborites, centered in their fortified city, pushed for the complete eradication of Catholic practices and a more egalitarian society. Their fervor clashed with the Utraquists, largely based in Prague, who sought a compromise that would allow communion under both kinds while maintaining a semblance of the old order. In Prague, the Utraquists, also known as the Calixtines, found a voice in figures like Prokop the Great. He, unlike Žižka, came from a clerical background, yet embraced the fight. Prokop sought a middle ground, a way for Bohemia to practice communion under both kinds without severing ties with the wider Christian world entirely. But his moderation was seen as weakness by the Taborites. Žižka attempted to mediate. He traveled to Tabor, meeting with its leaders, trying to impress upon them the dangers of their uncompromising stance. "We must be united against the common enemy," he urged, "or we will all fall." But the Taborites, fueled by their radical preachers, remained steadfast in their vision of a purified Bohemia. Queen Sophia, caught between her duty to the crown and her understanding of the Hussite grievances, watched the growing divide with increasing alarm. She knew that a fractured Bohemia was vulnerable to further crusades. She attempted to influence the Utraquists towards compromise, hoping to appease the more moderate elements of the rebellion. While negotiations stalled, the Hussite armies remained active. Prokop the Great, proving himself a capable commander, led raids into neighboring lands. These beautiful raids, as they were sometimes called, served to secure resources and demonstrate the strength of the Hussite cause, even if it alienated potential allies. Zhizka, despite his age and failing health, continued to fortify strategic locations and train his troops. He knew that the next crusade was inevitable, and that internal division only weakened their ability to resist. He instilled in his soldiers a fierce determination and innovative tactics. The wagon forts were a Hussite innovation. The Taborite preachers roamed the countryside, stirring up radical fervor. They denounced the Utraquists as compromisers and called for a complete break with Rome. Their message resonated with the poor and disenfranchised, who saw in the Hussite Revolution a chance for social and economic reform. The rift between Prokop and the Taborite leadership widened. Disagreements over strategy and religious doctrine became increasingly heated. Prokop believed in negotiation and compromise, while the Taborites insisted on unwavering adherence to their radical principles. Sophia continued to correspond with both sides, seeking any opportunity for reconciliation. She understood that the fate of Bohemia, and perhaps her own reign, hung in the balance. Her influence, however, was waning as the divisions deepened. Despite the internal strife, the Hussite armies remained a formidable fighting force. Their innovative tactics and weaponry, combined with their religious zeal, allowed them to repeatedly defeat larger and better-equipped Crusader armies. The wagon forts proved especially effective, providing mobile fortifications and devastating firepower. As the internal divisions grew, even Zhizka seemed to carry the weight of the world. He saw the potential for the Hussite cause to crumble from within, a tragedy far greater than any defeat at the hands of their enemies. He knew that leadership would soon pass to others. Prokop, now increasingly recognized as a leader, attempted to bridge the gap. He emphasized the common ground between the factions, reminding them of their shared commitment to Huss's teachings and the defense of Bohemia. But the seeds of discord had been sown, and the future remained uncertain. The Pope, emboldened by the apparent disunity within Bohemia, called for another crusade. This time, the forces arrayed against the Hussites were even greater, fueled by promises of absolution and plunder. Zhizka, though weary from years of war, remained the unwavering shield of the Hussites. He knew the terrain, the enemy's weaknesses, and the burning faith that fueled his own troops. The call to arms resonated throughout Bohemia. Farmers, artisans, and townsfolk, united by their faith and their fear of the invaders, rallied to Zhizka's banner. The Crusaders, confident in their superior numbers and equipment, charged headlong into the Hussite defenses. But they were met with a storm of iron from the dreaded Wagenburg, the Hussite war wagons. Zhizka, ever at the forefront, rallied his troops, his presence a beacon of defiance against the seemingly unstoppable Crusader tide. The battle raged for hours, a brutal clash of faith and steel. The Crusaders, though suffering heavy losses, pressed on, determined to crush the Hussite rebellion. At Nemeki Brod, the Crusaders, under the command of the Hungarian Sigismund, king of the Romans, cornered a large group of Hussites, promising them safe passage if they surrendered their weapons. It was a ruse. Sigismund broke his word. The Crusaders, in a frenzy of bloodlust, massacred the surrendered Hussites, men, women, and children, in a gruesome display of religious fanaticism. Zhizka, arriving too late to prevent the slaughter, was consumed by righteous fury. The massacre at Nemeki Broad became a rallying cry for the Hussites. It hardened their resolve and fueled their determination to resist the Crusades at any cost. Queen Sophia, horrified by the brutality of the war and the growing instability in Bohemia, desperately sought a path to peace. But her pleas for moderation were drowned out by the rising tide of religious fervor on both sides. With Žižka's health failing, new leaders emerged, preaching not only defense but also expansion. Prokop the Great, a former priest, instilled in the Hussites a fervent belief that they were doing God's work, and thus were entitled to carry their fight beyond Bohemia's borders. The Hussite wars were no longer confined to Bohemia. Prokop and his followers launched devastating raids into Silesia, Saxony, and even Bavaria, spreading fear and chaos throughout the Holy Roman Empire. The Crusades had failed, but the conflict was far from over. 1424. The invincible Žižka, the terror of Christendom, was brought low not by sword or mace, but by the invisible enemy, disease. A virulent plague swept through his ranks, felling soldiers faster than any battle. Even the great commander could not escape its grasp. He lay in his tent, his legendary strength failing. With his last breaths, Žižka addressed his captains. He urged them to remain united, to continue the fight for the truth of God's word, and to never surrender to the enemies of Bohemia. He bequeathed them his unwavering spirit, a legacy more potent than any weapon. Žižka's death sent a shockwave through the Hussite movement. His body was carried with reverence to Čáslav, where he was to be buried. The loss was profound, a void left in the leadership that seemed impossible to fill. In the wake of Žižka's passing, Prokop the Great emerged as a leading figure. A former priest, Prokop possessed both the strategic acumen and the unwavering faith to guide the Hussites. He stepped forward not to replace Žižka, but to continue his work. Prokop understood that the best defense was a strong offense. He advocated for continuing the Spanile Jizdi, the beautiful raids into neighboring lands. These expeditions not only provided much-needed supplies, but also spread fear and weakened the resolve of Bohemia's enemies. The Hussite armies under Prokop's command launched devastating raids into Saxony, Silesia, and Austria. They were unstoppable, their war wagons and innovative weaponry proving too much for the disorganized imperial forces. The raids were brutal but effective, a clear message to the Holy Roman Empire. Bohemia would not be subdued. In Prague, Queen Sophia watched the Hussite raids with growing unease. While she understood the grievances of the Bohemian people, she feared the long-term consequences of such relentless warfare. The delicate balance she had tried to maintain was crumbling under the weight of continued conflict. Prokop rallied his troops. He emphasized the importance of discipline and faith. "We fight not for plunder," he declared, "but for the freedom to worship God according to our conscience." His words resonated with the soldiers, reinvigorating their commitment to the cause. The Hussite armies, despite Žižka's death, continued to innovate. The wagon fort, a mobile fortress of interconnected wagons, remained their signature tactic. They chose their battlegrounds carefully, using terrain to their advantage and turning every encounter into a deadly trap for their enemies. Prokop was not just a strategist, he was a warrior. He led from the front, inspiring his troops with his courage and faith. He was a constant presence on the battlefield, a symbol of Hussite resistance. The Hussite raids brought not only supplies but also prisoners. Many captured knights and nobles were held for ransom, further enriching the Hussite coffers and weakening the resolve of their enemies. The power dynamic had shifted. The once invincible knights of Christendom were now at the mercy of the Bohemian heretics. Despite the victories, Prokop knew that the war could not continue forever. The constant raids and battles were taking a toll on Bohemia. He began to consider the possibility of negotiation, of finding a path to peace that would preserve the Hussite faith and secure the freedom of the Bohemian people. The seeds of future compromise were being sown, even amidst the chaos of war. The death of Žižka left a void, but the Hussite cause marched on. Prokop the Great, a former priest-turned-warrior, rose to fill the leadership vacuum. He inherited Žižka's tactical brilliance but possessed a different kind of fire, a quiet, unwavering resolve rooted in his deep faith and concern for the people. The Hussite raids became bolder under Prokop. No longer confined to defensive maneuvers, they ventured into Austria, Silesia, and Saxony. These beautiful rides, as they were sometimes called, were not simply acts of aggression, but desperate measures for survival, and to bring the fight to those that continued to launch crusades into Bohemia. Not all agreed with Prokop's strategy. The radical Taborites, hardened by years of war, saw the raids as a righteous punishment against the enemies of God. Others, more moderate, worried about the long-term consequences of such widespread devastation and the alienation of potential allies. Queen Sophia, observing the situation from Prague, found herself in an increasingly precarious position. The Hussite raids further destabilized the region, straining her already tenuous relationship with the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Emperor. She saw the necessity for peace but feared the consequences of compromise. The Hussite armies were not merely bands of soldiers, they were entire communities on the move. Wagons carried not only weapons but also families, livestock, and the tools of everyday life. This mobile lifestyle made them difficult to defeat and underscored their determination to survive. The raids were brutal. Villages were pillaged, churches desecrated, and civilians suffered. While the Hussites justified these actions as retaliation for the Crusades, they left a trail of destruction and resentment in their wake. The devastation caused by the Hussite raids could not be ignored. The Council of Basel, desperate to end the conflict, initiated negotiations. They sent envoys to Bohemia, hoping to find common ground and bring the Hussites back into the fold of the Catholic Church. The legacy of Žižka loomed large over the negotiations. His spirit of defiance and his unwavering commitment to the Hussite cause inspired Prokop and the negotiators. They knew they could not betray his memory by accepting a peace that compromised their core beliefs. Prokop skillfully balanced the demands of the council with the deeply held convictions of the Hussites. He understood the need for compromise, but refused to yield on the fundamental principles of communion under both kinds and the freedom to preach the gospel. The Council of Basel was not without its own internal divisions. Some cardinals favored a hardline approach, demanding complete submission from the Hussites. Others recognized the futility of continued warfare and advocated for a more conciliatory stance. Queen Sophia, acting as an intermediary, played a crucial role in facilitating the negotiations. She used her influence to persuade both sides to make concessions, recognizing that a lasting peace was essential for the survival of Bohemia. The negotiations culminated in the Compactada of Prague, a compromise agreement that granted the Hussites communion under both kinds and limited freedom of preaching. It was a landmark achievement, a testament to the resilience of the Hussites and the recognition by the Catholic Church that the Bohemian question could not be solved by force alone. However, the Compactada was not universally accepted, setting the stage for further conflict. The Compactada of Prague, a compromise granting communion under both kinds, was lauded by many, but for the radical Taborites it was a betrayal of Huss's true vision. Prokop, though pained by the division, stood firm with the faithful, unwilling to compromise on what he saw as divine truth. Queen Sophia, now watching the kingdom teeter on the brink of civil war, hoped the Compactada would bring lasting peace, yet she knew the deep divisions ran far beyond any parchment agreement. The moderate Utraquists were willing to accept the terms, but the Taborites' staunch refusal threatened to plunge Bohemia back into chaos. Žižka's spirit, though his body lay at rest, permeated the Taborite ranks. His legacy of unwavering faith and military innovation had shaped them into a force unlike any other. But even his tactical brilliance could not bridge the growing chasm between radical conviction and pragmatic compromise. The final confrontation was inevitable. At Lipany, the armies of the Utraquist nobility and their Catholic allies faced the Taborite forces, a clash of ideologies as much as of arms. Brother against brother, former allies now locked in a deadly embrace. Prokop, though weary of war, fought with the zeal of a true believer. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he would not yield. The chalice, symbol of their faith, was his only shield and his only weapon. Perhaps in the ethereal realm, Žižka watched with a heavy heart. His dream of a unified, reformed Bohemia was crumbling before him, consumed by the very divisions he had fought so hard to overcome. The Battle of Lipany was a decisive victory for the Utraquists and their Catholic allies. The Taborite army was crushed, their leaders slain, their wagons captured. The radical flame for now was extinguished. Queen Sophia, witnessing the aftermath of the battle, felt a profound sense of loss. Peace had come, but at a terrible price. The dream of a united Bohemia, reformed and at peace, seemed further away than ever. In the wake of Lipany, the Utraquists consolidated their power. The Compactada was reaffirmed, and Bohemia, though still nominally under Catholic rule, gained a significant degree of autonomy. The chalice, once a symbol of rebellion, became a symbol of a hard one, if imperfect, compromise. Though the Taborites were defeated, the spirit of Jan Hus lived on. In hidden corners of Bohemia, preachers kept the flame of reform alive, sowing the seeds of future dissent. The Hussite wars may have ended, but the quest for religious freedom had just begun. The Hussite Wars, a brutal and transformative period in Bohemian history, left an indelible mark on the region and beyond. The ideas of Jan Hus, though suppressed, continued to resonate, influencing later reformers like Martin Luther and shaping the course of the Protestant Reformation. The legacy of the Hussites is one of courage, conviction, and ultimately compromise. They stood against the might of the Church and the Empire, demanding the right to worship according to their conscience. Their struggle, though marked by bloodshed and division, paved the way for a new era of religious and political thought, forever changing the landscape of Europe.